I have two readings for you this morning. The first one comes from the poet Naomi Shihab, and it's called Kindness. She writes this: before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop, the passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. For you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you. How he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside you. You must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. Here ends the first reading. Okay, the second reading is by the poet Stephen Dunn. It's called Sweetness. Just when it has seemed I couldn't bear one more friend walking with a tumor, one more maniac with a perfect reason, often a sweetness has come and changed nothing in the world except the way I stumbled through it. For a while lost in the ignorance of loving someone or something, the world shrunk to mouth size, half size, and never seeming small. I acknowledge there is no sweetness that doesn't leave a stain, no sweetness that's ever sufficiently sweet. Tonight, a friend called to say his lover was killed in a car he was driving. His voice was low and guttural. He repeated what he needed to repeat, and I repeated the one or two words we have for such grief until we were speaking only in tones. Often a sweetness comes as if on loan, stays long enough to make sense of what it means to be alive, then returns to its dark source. As for me, I don't care where it's been or what bitter road it's traveled to come so far, to taste so good. Here ends this morning's readings. I lead a number of Soul Matters groups, and as I do with, I take notes as I'm leading and facilitating a group, and I often hold on to some of the notes because sometimes what people say is something that like sticks to me like glue. And I went back through my notes not that long ago when I was thinking about this piece on kindness, and I found what one of my parishioners had said in a group, and they said this: during my darkest time, learning that there was kindness was what kept me going on. And I wonder this morning if the significance of that actually can sink in for us. Because in our culture, kindness is quaint, right? I mean, it's kind of like cute, not really significant. Fodder for sentimental stories told to children, not the serious business of serious adults. And more than that, at its worst, our culture considers kindness a weakness. Ruthlessness is what gets one ahead, one keeps one safe. Nevertheless, here it is, in the simple and beautiful line, proof that no matter how mocked and laughed at kind of kindness can be, it is something more, something far more than cute. And I wonder this morning how often we really, really get that. When I found this quote, I had stapled a writing I had on the topic to it as well, and it was, This I believe statement that I wrote a while ago, but I think it's pertinent for today. Here's what I wrote. I believe that nothing works and nobody survives unless there is kindness. I believe that despite the great pain and deep wounds in our lives, the vast majority of us stay afloat, not miraculously, but naturally, due to the dozens of tiny kindnesses that we are gifted with each day. I believe that the kindness we offer others makes the difference between life and death in ways we, the givers, actually really never know. And I believe that all of this is very easy to forget. At least I know it's something that's easy for me to forget. Okay, so it's not that I tell myself that I forget because I'm cruel or callous or inherently like sinful or something. It's just that, like most of humanity, I'm fragile and easily wounded, more than I'd like to admit. Life's disappointments and setbacks overwhelm all of us at times, because it's all too easy, really, to kind of wallow in self-pity, convincing ourselves that we are the unique victims of generosity withheld. And when we feel that life and others are not generous to us, then why? Why, we ask ourselves, should we be kind and generous to others? Out of our hurt, we can become stingy. Because of our pain, we withhold tenderness. Bearing witness to the vileness of the public square makes us at times lash out in kindness, and on the other spectrum, retreat into worry and isolation. And then, of course, right, there's this like flurry of life's events and demands and responsibilities that can kind of make us dizzy and disoriented, so tired and tugged in 1,000 different directions that we no longer seem to notice or are able to give the kindness that we know should be right in front of us. When your nose is buried in your to-do list, you in effect can become blind. When you've got to pick up the kids in 15 minutes, or visit one more doctor in a day, or call back the insurance guy who says there's something wrong going on with your insurance, in the end, there's simply not a lot of room on your schedule left for kindness. There just isn't. And frankly, none of that would really matter that much, this forgetting, this emotional kind of stinginess that we all have, if it weren't for the pain that's omnipresent but so rarely talked about. I was at First Unitarian in Rochester for 13 years, and I followed a minister who had been there for 32. His name was Dick Gilbert. And when he left, this is one of the things that he had in his final sermon that he's saying to this congregation after 32 years. This is what he said. People are precious and in more pain than you can see, so be gentle with them. Our lives are like fragile eggs, so handle them with care, handle them with exceeding care, for there are human beings within. Human beings who feel as we feel, who hurt as we hurt, who hunger for joy as much as we do. Therefore, since we know how it is to be hurt by others, since we know how important it is to be respected and loved, we all need to be a little kinder than necessary. So I want us to think about that for just a moment. I think it's kind of amazing, really. After 30 years of ministry to a congregation, after hundreds of sermons that Dick gave to all of them, all the ideas and insights, what Dick chose to highlight, what he decided to leave that congregation with, was a reminder about pain, about the pervasive hurt and fragility that's woven through all of our lives. I hope you realize how huge that is. Here's a man whose life's work was to wrestle with what it means to be a church, right? What it means to be human, what it means to be close to the holy. And at the end, he answered those questions by calling us to pay attention to and let our actions be guided by each other's pain. So this is not a vision that depicts kindness as cute or quaint, as some nice little bonus in the midst of the day. It is the farthest thing actually from cute and quaint one could even imagine. This is a vision that is trying to wake us up to the fact that our acts of kindness involve us in the most sacred of all dramas, the drama that enables life to go on. Or as Naomi Nye puts it so wonderfully in her poem that I read earlier, kindness is what ties your shoes each morning and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. And if that doesn't make sense or sound like a big deal to you, then center yourself and think about it again. Do what Naomi Nye suggests you to think about in your time with your life when you've lost things, when the future, as she puts it, dissolves in a moment of salt. Think about a time in your life when the precious thing you held in your hand or the precious person that you did is suddenly gone. Think about how hard it was then, even to imagine wanting to tie your shoes, mail a letter, or to buy bread ever again. And yet we do, right? Despite the hurt and the wounds, betrayals and losses, we get up every day and we tie our shoes and we buy bread. And why? Why are we able to do that? Well, because as Dick and Naomi Nye and Stephen Dunn are trying to tell us on some deep and fundamental level, we trust in the kindness of strangers and friends. Many years ago, in my early 20s, I was broke. I had a job, but it didn't really cover our bills. My husband at the time was in graduate school, and I was barely making it. In fact, we weren't really making it, but I did not want to ask either one of our parents for money. So we were scraping by and kind of miserable. One day I went out to put a letter in the mailbox, and my neighbor had walked out with her little dachshund named Bob, and she, said, "How you doing?" And for some reason, I must have felt open enough or vulnerable enough, or I trusted her enough to tell her what was going on. And she said to me, "Well, that sounds really hard." And said, "It is hard." And she said, "Well, I'm thinking of you." We finished chatting and she walked away with her dog, Bob. 2 days later, I came home from work on this long commute and I walked to the back of this house that we lived in, like the basement apartment, and I got there and there were 2 full bags of groceries on the stairs. They were there like out of nowhere, right? There was a little note that said, "Thought you could use some good food." And all there was she had signed her name. It is said, by the way, that people will forget what you said and what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Which, by the way, I can't for the life of me remember this woman's name, but I know how she buoyed me up, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well. So I keep coming back to that line in Stephen Dunn's poem that says, "Often a sweetness has come and changed nothing in the world except the way that I stumble through it." My neighbor's act of kindness didn't change the world around me, but it most certainly altered the way that I stumbled through it. Her simple act affected more than just my relationship with her. It altered my relationship with life itself. It made the world feel safer to stumble through, even if the potholes and blurry path ahead remained exactly the same as it did before. So the whole thing reminds me, as I hope it reminds all of you, that our ability to be kind gives us not simply the ability to brighten each other's day, but the ability to restore each other's faith that the universe is a generous and trustworthy place, which in turn enables us to get up and keep stumbling through it. Here's the thing, though. I think we got to admit that all of that is kind of a fairly like foreign idea for us as Unitarian Universalists, especially because of the dominance of the Unitarian side of our tradition that we have focused on for the last 100 years or so, that it is not kindness that gets us through, but it is reason that gets us through life. Our battle cry really for decades has been that we are guided not by revelation, but by reason. Our members have historically said that they actually come to church for intellectual stimulation. The goal of our worship has been not so much about character development or moral alignment, but rather the cultivation of our ever more discriminating minds. It's the cultivated mind we've most often put our faith and trust in to help us negotiate the challenges and complexities of life. And yet, part of the reason I'm giving this sermon to all of you today is that I believe we all, to some degree or another, have reached a point where we feel that this discriminating mind, it's not enough, really. That's not to say we don't value our brains. I'm pretty sure we do. None of us wants to be part of a religion that asks us to leave our questioning intellect at the door. But what makes being a Unitarian Universalist in this time and place so exciting, actually, I think, is that we've become wise enough to realize that in addition to having impressive brains, there's so much more we want and need to be. A number of years ago, I came across this fabulous movie that actually was a book that had, they turned into a movie after it won the Pulitzer Prize. It's a play, actually, called Wit. And its central character is Vivian Baring, a renowned scholar and professor of philosophy and English literature. Her specialty, the metaphysical love sonnets of John Donne. They're considered, of course, the most complex and intellectually challenging poems in all of the English canon. She is considered by colleagues and students alike kind of the master of the life of the mind. So the play begins with her being diagnosed with late stages of ovarian cancer. And from the start, both we and her know that she is going to die. But because she is tough and a scholar, she agrees to undergo this like radical experiential chemotherapy for research's sake, a chance to make, as she puts it, one last contribution to knowledge. It will be difficult, the doctors tell her, emotionally as well as physically. That's okay, says Vivian. I know all about life and death. After all, I am a scholar. So as the play progresses, Vivian's toughness and sure-footedness kind of slowly dissipate as she is treated by the medical staff as a little bit more than a common lab rat. And this sterile treatment and her growing need for comfort precipitate an epiphany both for her, doctors, and herself. And she realizes suddenly, the doctors are like me. They prefer research to humanity. So this pivotal moment sets off a chain of flashbacks in which she revisits moments during her distinguished career where the love of abstract debate kind of and intellectual precision caused her to ignore real human pain. So far, it sounds pretty depressing, doesn't it? And yet when Vivian does with this tragic kind of realization, ironically causes the play to end, not with us watching a teacher die, but with us watching a teacher teaching us a valuable lesson as she dies. After one last final kind of flashback, she's sitting all alone and she's thinking, and then there's a tear that comes down her face, and slowly she reaches over to call in one of the nurses who has been one of the only tender people with her during her stay in the hospital. Nurse comes in and Vivian looks up and she says, "I'm scared. I'm really scared." And immediately this nurse takes her hand and replies, "Oh, honey, of course you are." "I don't feel sure of myself anymore," says Vivian. "And you're used to feeling sure of yourself," says the nurse. "Oh, yes," says Vivian. "I used to feel so sure." And then tears flow down Vivian's face. And she accepts that touch from the nurse. Then the nurse caresses her hair until Vivian is calm again and hands her a tissue, and she says, "Hey, I'll be right back." She leaves the room, comes back, and she's got a popsicle in her hand, grape, the kind with 2 sticks. And the nurse breaks the sticks in half, keeps one for herself, and hands the other one to Vivian. And then she sits down and tells her the story about how when she was a kid and the sound of that ice cream truck rolling through and going to get popsicles with her friend always made everything seem okay. And she turns to Vivian and says she's sorry that she's scared. And then they sit in silence, holding hands and eating their popsicle. A little while later, the nurse leaves, and then Vivian does this that ends the scene. She says this: "Well, that certainly was a maudlin display. Popsicles, for heaven's sakes. I can't believe my life has become so corny. But it can't be helped, really. I don't see any other way. We are discussing life and death, and not in the abstract way. Either we are discussing my life and death, and I can't conceive of any other tone. Now is not the time for verbal swordplay, for unlikely flights of the imagination and widely shifting perspectives, for metaphysical conceit, for wit. Nothing would be worse than a detailed scholarly analysis, erudition, interpretation, complication. Now is the time for simplicity. Now is the time for, dare I say it, for kindness. I thought being extremely smart would take care of it, but I see that I've been found out." There's an old joke about a Unitarian who dies and finds himself standing up in the clouds in heaven, and there are 2 paths in front of him. There's a sign that says, "This way to heaven," and another one that says, "This way to a discussion about heaven." And the Unitarian picks the one that says, "The discussion about heaven." Smarts and discussions, no doubt, are an essential and sacred part of being human. But it seems to me that actually what makes us most human is the wisdom to know when to choose the discussion and when to choose the real thing. Knowing when is the time for wit and when is the time for kindness, and remembering through all of it that famous old piece of wisdom from which the title of this sermon comes, by William Wordsworth: "The best portion of a good person's life is their little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love." May it be so.